You know the exact sound of a Ziploc bag being rinsed out in the sink so it can dry on the rack and get reused for the fifth time? You know what it feels like to open a birthday card with cash inside, and before you've even finished counting it, watch it disappear straight into your savings. A savings account you've never once actually touched. You've eaten the same leftovers 3 nights in a row, not because there wasn't more food, but because throwing anything away simply wasn't a thing that happened in your house. None of that happened because your family didn't have money. It happened because in your house, money had exactly one job: protect your future. And enjoying your present wasn't really part of the plan. That one unspoken rule didn't stay in your childhood kitchen. It's still running your bank account right now, today, whether you've ever noticed it or not. And the psychology behind why is genuinely fascinating. So stay with me. Picture your report card day. You hand it over, and before your parents even say a word, their eyes go straight to one specific number. Not your name, not the subject, just the number. And depending on that number, you either got a rare, warm kind of pride directed at you, or you got silence. The kind of silence that felt heavier than any punishment. In some houses, a good report card meant an actual cash reward. $10 an A, maybe. And you learned fast that this wasn't really about the $10. It was proof. Proof that the sacrifice was working. Proof that you were worth what was being spent on you. You remember weekends that weren't really weekends? Helping out at the family restaurant or the store or wherever your parents worked, folding napkins or restocking shelves while your friends were at the mall? You didn't get an allowance for that. It wasn't framed as a job. It was just what you did, because everyone in the family contributed, and contributing was love, even if nobody ever called it that. You remember specific enrichment classes, Kumon, piano, SAT prep, whatever the equivalent was in your house, that cost real money every single month. No negotiation, no hesitation. And in that same house, you remember being told no to a school field trip that cost $15 because $15 wasn't necessary. You had a sibling too, and even though nobody ever said it directly, you both understood the family had a limited amount of attention and resources to hand out. And every semester, you quietly kept score of who was ahead. Not because you wanted to compete with each other. Because somewhere along the way, you both learned that being the easier, less expensive, more worth it child was its own kind of safety. You remember family gatherings too, the ones where an aunt or uncle would casually mention a cousin's test score or which university they'd gotten into, and you'd watch your parents' faces do something small and complicated. Pride and comparison at the same time. You didn't need anyone to explain what that look meant. You just quietly understood that your worth was, at least a little, being measured against someone else's kid, and that whatever money was being spent on you had better produce results that held up in that comparison. You didn't know it then, but you were being taught a rule with total clarity, even though it was never once spoken out loud. Money spent on becoming something is good money. Money spent on simply wanting something is dangerous money. Here's where this gets genuinely interesting. There's a concept from psychologist Carl Rogers called conditional positive regard. The idea that a child learns approval and love are tied directly to meeting specific conditions, like performance or achievement, rather than being unconditional. Compare that to the report card moment. The warmth you got wasn't unrelated to the number. It was tied directly to it. So your brain, very reasonably, drew a conclusion that would follow you for decades. I am worth investing in when I perform and uncertain when I don't. There's also a concept from family systems theory, developed by psychiatrist Ivan Bajormeni-Nagy, called invisible loyalty. The idea that families run on an unspoken ledger of who sacrificed what for whom. And children often feel a deep, wordless obligation to pay it back, even though nobody ever explicitly asked them to. Nobody sat you down and said, "We worked those weekends so you'd owe us." It didn't need to be said. You absorbed it from the reused Ziploc bags, the redirected birthday money, the $15 field trip that was somehow too much while the SAT prep somehow wasn't. Then there's a specific finding in behavioral economics from researchers Senhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir, who studied what real scarcity does to the mind. When resources are genuinely tight, the brain starts what they call tunneling, narrowing focus almost entirely onto the most immediate pressing need, while everything outside that tunnel, including present moment enjoyment, effectively disappears from view. Your parents likely weren't being harsh for the sake of it. Their brains had been shaped by real scarcity to treat almost any non-essential expense as a threat to the one thing that mattered most, your ability to have a better life than they did. Here's the detail almost nobody tells you, though. That tunnel vision doesn't disappear the moment the scarcity does. This is sometimes called a learned scarcity mindset, a mental pattern that persists long after someone's actual financial situation improves, because the nervous system adapted to a threat that, for years, was completely real. Your parents might be financially comfortable today and still rinse out ziplock bags. It's not about the plastic bag anymore. It's a nervous system habit from a time when every bag actually mattered. And underneath all of it is one more piece worth naming clearly. In a lot of these households, provision becomes the primary language of love. Not hugs, not "I'm proud of you" said out loud. Tuition paid, meals made, sacrifices made silently and rarely acknowledged. Which means, as a kid, you learn to read love through spending and sacrifice instead of words. That gets rewired into something very specific in adulthood. A belief that your worth is something you have to keep earning through performance, because that's the exact currency love was paid in growing up. You didn't see any of this clearly until one very ordinary moment as an adult. You got a promotion. A real one. More money than you'd ever made. Something that should have felt like pure celebration. And the very first thing you did, before you even told a friend, before you let yourself feel anything about it, was calculate how much of that extra money you needed to send home. Nobody asked you to. Nobody had to. It was automatic, the same way you'd once known exactly which number on a report card meant safety and which one meant silence. That same week, a coworker mentioned, completely casually, that they'd just booked a solo trip purely for themselves. No occasion, no justification required. You remember the specific, uncomfortable feeling that hit you? Not envy exactly. Something closer to confusion, like watching someone speak a language you technically knew the words to but had never once let yourself actually say out loud. Later that night, you sat with an honest question, maybe for the first time in your life. When was the last time you spent money on something purely because it made you happy, with zero mental ledger running quietly in the background? You genuinely couldn't answer it, and that scared you more than any actual number in your bank account ever had. You started noticing it everywhere once you knew to look. The way you'd hover over the buy button on something small and non-essential, not because you couldn't afford it, but because some old alarm system in your head was quietly asking whether you'd earned the right to want something just for yourself. The way a relaxed weekend with nothing productive happening made you restless in a way you couldn't quite explain. Like rest itself needed to be justified by results. Because what you realized sitting there was that you weren't actually managing your money as an adult. You were still managing an old family ledger that had never once been officially closed. Every raise felt like it partly belonged to someone else before it even hit your account. Every purchase for yourself came with a silent audit. Have I earned this? Does this honor what was given up for me? Am I still the worth it child this month? You'd built an entire adult financial identity around a debt you were never formally told existed and had never once questioned either. This isn't a story about deciding your parents were wrong or that their sacrifice didn't matter. It mattered enormously, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonest. What actually needed to change wasn't your gratitude, it was the invisible ledger quietly running underneath it. The first real shift came from simply naming what was happening, out loud, the moment it showed up. Every time that automatic guilt hit, after a purchase, after a good week, after enjoying something purely for yourself, you started asking one question. Is this actual danger, or is this the old ledger talking? Just naming it took away a surprising amount of its grip. It's much harder for an invisible debt to run your decisions once you can see it clearly and separate it from the present moment. The second thing was learning to hold two truths that had always felt like the same thing. You can deeply honor what someone sacrificed for you without spending the rest of your life auditing every dollar you spend as either worth it or wasteful. Gratitude and guilt feel almost identical from the inside, but they lead to completely different lives. The third thing, and this one took real repeated practice, was deliberately spending small amounts of money on yourself for no reason other than enjoyment, and sitting with the discomfort afterward instead of immediately justifying it or undoing it. It felt almost rebellious the first few times, like breaking a rule nobody had ever actually written down. But that discomfort is exactly the old tunnel vision loosening its grip, one small rep at a time. You also had one real honest conversation. First with your sibling, comparing notes on what you'd each quietly carried, and realizing you'd both been keeping score of the same invisible ledger without ever once talking about it. And then eventually a conversation with a parent not to assign blame, just to understand. What came back wasn't coldness or control. It was fear, dressed up as discipline, because they genuinely believed frugality was the only tool they had to guarantee you a future they never got to have themselves. That conversation didn't erase years of an internal ledger overnight, but it did something important. It turned an invisible, faceless debt into a specific human act of love from someone doing their best with what they had. And it's a lot easier to put a ledger down once you understand it was never actually meant to trap you in the first place. Here's what I actually want you to sit with, more than any single detail of this story. You didn't inherit your relationship with money the way you inherit your height. You inherited it the way you inherit a language, through years of watching how the people who raised you handled fear, sacrifice, and love, especially when they never had the words to say any of it directly. And the part that should genuinely give you hope is this: anything absorbed through repetition can be examined, understood, and slowly rewritten. It just has to be seen first. So ask yourself honestly, how much of what you do with money today is actually your own decision? And how much of it is still an unpaid ledger from a house you don't even live in anymore? Tell me in the comments, was it the report card money, the sibling comparison, or the guilt around spending on yourself that hit closest? I want to know, because that's genuinely where the best conversations on this channel come from. If this felt like your story too, subscribe. This is exactly what we dig into here every week. Not just what to do with your money, but why you actually do what you do with it in the first place.